Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking to you about imagery and change detection and carbon accounting in forestry, and we're so excited that you're joining us today. My name is Audrey Lamb. I'm a commercial forestry account manager at Esri, based in our Olympia, Washington office, and today I'm joined by my colleague Scott Newlis, and I'm going to let him introduce himself.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We appreciate your time today. Like Audrey said, I'm Scott Newlis. I'm a solution engineer on our natural resources team, and I'm based out of Houston.
So we've got a pretty packed agenda for our webinar today. We're going to start out with a brief introduction into Esri. Then we're going to get into the carbon accounting workflow, talk about some of the data sets that we're going to be using. Scott is going to walk through a demonstration of that workflow. And then we're going to look at what happens after a natural disaster might occur on your property and what the change detection workflow looks like in order to understand the impact of that event on your land. And Scott's going to do a demonstration of that. We're going to wrap up with some closing thoughts, and then we're going to open up the floor to you to ask your questions, and we'll answer them today. And if we don't get a chance to answer them, then we'll follow up with you after the webinar. Today is a really special webinar because we actually broke a record for the amount of people registered for this in all of natural resources. So we're really excited to be presenting something that so many of you find relevant. And with that, I'm going to turn off my camera so that we can focus on the content here. And we're going to get going. So before we get started, I'd like to introduce Esri to those of you who might not be familiar with us. We're the global market leader in GIS, and we've been in business as a software company for over 50 years. We're based in Redlands, California, with offices around the United States and around the world. Commercial forestry companies were some of our very first customers, and we're very, very humbled to continue to work alongside you as your business operations have evolved over the many years that we've worked together. Today, we're really excited to show you how you can use ArcGIS software that you probably already have to access a new market, forest carbon. ArcGIS supports three fundamental systems in forestry. First, a system of record keeping. This is your core forest data, including forest inventories, stand delineation, and property boundaries. Second, the analytics you perform to explore or analyze that data. This includes using models, imagery, and biometrics with your forest data to understand, plan, and predict activities. Third, sharing the results of your analysis across your organization and externally to make better business decisions. This used to mean printing out a map, walking down the hallway, and giving that to one of your colleagues. Now we're seeing many of you share interactive maps online with your key stakeholders to put that information into their hands no matter where they are. Forest carbon projects require a lot of different types of data: ownership boundaries, growth models, imagery, even contact information for property owners that might be stored in an Excel document. And the incredible thing about GIS is that it really gives you the ability to link all of these unrelated data sets together. That's what we're going to focus on today during our demos, where Scott is going to show you how to incorporate data sets you may not normally use into your GIS to leverage what's out there and what's available. Here are some great examples of how our customers in natural resources are using GIS to make better business decisions. We can see here how GIS is being used to manage honeybee colonies, do an aquaculture suitability analysis, site wind energy and hydropower projects, and plan optimal routing for forest operations. Specifically in forestry, our market, we all know how to use GIS to do forest inventories. And here we see many great examples of how you're using the platform to do inventories with LiDAR, drone imagery, and modeling, and share your results interactively and meaningfully with your stakeholders. Today, we're going to show you how to take that foundational knowledge that you already have and apply it to a new market. Forest carbon is a brand new market for most forest resource companies, and it has a lot of unknowns. The market is quickly changing. There are different requirements that are emerging, different timelines for projects. And as a forest resource company, how do you get in there and how do you participate in this market? How do you prioritize projects when you have other uses on those lands? What's the best approach for a due diligence process that you can repeat across different land holdings? How do you respond when your potential project is impacted by a natural disaster? These are all questions that many of you are facing as you start to build out these workflows at your organizations. And the great news is that you probably already have the tools and the foundational knowledge to answer those questions. We're going to show you how to build simple and repeatable workflows to address these questions and give your key stakeholders the information that they need to make better decisions for this market. Every forester on this call here knows how to do volume calculations using GIS. And as you know, you often need to get boots on the ground ahead of time to collect inventory information needed for volume calculations. When you're doing that across an entire region, it becomes very costly and very complex to scale that fieldwork. We're excited to show you how to use publicly available data to quantify your potential carbon stocks and prioritize project locations before you spend the time and the money to get boots on the ground. There's a lot of publicly available data that you can incorporate into your company's workflows to quickly get more insight into your forest lands. In this case, we're using a pilot data set from the Forest Service Forest Inventory and Analysis team to quantify our company's carbon stocks. There's high quality publicly available data coming out all the time, whether it's related to climate modeling, disease, drought prediction, or wildfire potential. If you have a rigid workflow that doesn't allow you to incorporate new data, then you're really missing out on the opportunity to leverage the incredible work that people like Ty Wilson, Chris Oswald, and their team at the U.S. Forest Service are doing. We really want to help you broaden your horizons as you think about how you'll perform these analyses at scale to leverage the system that you have. The data that we're using today comes from the FIA Big Map platform. This is provisional data that came out of a pilot and will likely be available to the public in Q1 of 2021. There's a massive amount of data that the team at FIA has put together in the Big Map platform, and we're only going to be scratching the surface today of how you can really use that data. We're so grateful to Ty Wilson, Chris Oswald, and their team at FIA for sharing their incredible work with us. I'll provide their contact information later in the talk so you can reach out to them directly if you're interested in learning more about their work. Now I'm going to hand it over to Scott, who's going to walk us through the carbon inventory workflow.
Thanks, Audrey. So I think everyone on this call today knows that managing forest land really involves making some informed decisions. And for forestry organizations, investors, and landowners alike, having this comprehensive view of ownership and assets is really critical to that decision-making process. Here I've got an ArcGIS dashboard pulled up that's been configured to provide an accurate picture of land ownership. With it, I can connect to our authoritative data and better understand how our land is currently being used. I can quickly see where all of our timberlands are at, where all of our recreational leases are, and even things like preserved habitat areas, energy leases, and more. Now, as an organization, we may want to determine the highest and best use for all of our land. And this will likely involve reevaluating how that land is currently being used in favor of environmental or economic benefits. So as Audrey mentioned, carbon capture and storage is an emerging market that our organization would like to get into and enter. And in order to do this, as a forestry organization, we first need to determine which assets are the most suitable for carbon storage. Here, I've got ArcGIS Pro pulled up and a map of all of our company timberlands in Northern California. These lands are currently used exclusively for silviculture and harvesting activities. Now, as a GIS or carbon analyst, I've been tasked with identifying which of these areas are the most suitable for carbon storage. And to do that, I need to start with a good reference point. Some of you out there may be collecting your own inventory data, but a lot of you are likely not, especially for things like carbon storage. And this is really where that U.S. Forest Service FIA data that Audrey just mentioned can come into the picture. So here I've got some of that forest inventory data that's been clipped out to our area of interest. And this data in particular is a raster data set. So for those of you out there that aren't as familiar with working with raster data sets, think of this as a giant image that contains a lot of different pixels or cells that store a numeric value. If I zoom in here, we can see kind of what that looks like. So I can click on any of these pixels here, and I get some information about the different bands in this particular data set and the values associated with them. Now, this particular data set, each cell contains the estimated value of carbon storage potential in tons per acre. That's been calculated by the fine folks there at the US Forest Service with all of their algorithms and functions. Now, this particular data set here has 8 bands. And if I open up my properties here, I can see this right here. And each of these 8 bands represents a different storage category. So the folks there at the Forest Service have actually categorized storage potential into things like tree above ground, soil organic, understory, and more. So each of these 8 different bands stores the carbon storage potential for that particular pixel, and how we symbolize this raster data set can allow us to view it a little differently. So by default, we're just showing 3 of those bands, and the color combination is reflecting that accordingly. What I've gone ahead and done is actually sum up all of those 8 values within each pixel to create one data set that shows the overall storage potential in each pixel. And if we zoom back into an area here, I can click on one of these pixels and get the value of total storage potential. And this is in tons per acre. Now, it's going to be hard to go over a whole forest or a whole area and look at each individual pixel. That's not a workflow that's going to scale very well. But what we can do is assign each of these pixels into a classification that really helps us identify where those areas of the highest potential are. So here I've got all of those pixels now remapped to a value between 1 and 10. That helps us easily visualize where those areas of high storage potential are. And we're really only interested for this workflow in those areas that represent our ownership or our tracks or stands. So I'm going to go ahead and clip that data set to our stand boundaries there and turn off my stands real quick. And when we zoom in, we can now see kind of a really fine example of the overall storage potential within each particular stand. Now we're still looking at individual pixels here, so it's still a little tough to delineate which specific stands have the overall highest potential. So doing some more kind of raster analytics and functions that are available out of the box here within Pro, I can actually calculate an average score by each stand based on the summed value of all of the pixels in each of those polygons. Now what this allows me to do is easily visualize and even prioritize those areas that have the highest average score. In this case, our highest scores are going to be values probably over 6 or 6.5 up to 8.5. And we can go ahead and mask out those values so we can just focus on those areas with the high potential.
So Scott, that really looks great, and I'm so impressed how quickly you're able to do that. I'm curious what other variables an organization might want to take into account that could be favorable or unfavorable for a potential project.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the actual carbon storage potential of a particular piece of land isn't going to be the only factor that you want to take into account. An organization might want to look at things like historical harvest activities and understand where past harvests have occurred and likely where future harvests are planned. And this will help us identify how we've set aside or how we're currently managing specific stands or tracts of land. Another factor that we might want to look at is distance to mill. So here I've got a data set loaded in with some mills around this area, and we can do things like calculate the distance for tracked or stand to that mill in order to give us a good understanding of transportation costs and the overall cost to actually harvest and deliver logs to mill to be processed. Another factor that organizations might be interested in is the terrain and slope of the land or the ground out there in that area. So here I'm bringing in some terrain data from the Living Atlas, and this allows me to easily visualize areas that have a greater slope, areas that have a less slope, and this can help me identify which tracts are economically feasible to harvest based on how easy or how difficult it is to actually get equipment in there to do some of our treatment and harvesting activities. So once I've identified kind of all of those variables and constraints that I want to take into account, I can come up with the highly suitable areas that we want to focus on. If I zoom back out to our overview here, this really leaves me with all of those kind of prioritized project areas that we want to focus on. And this data still is in a raster format, which really means that if I click on one of these polygons, I'm just getting kind of this summed value of all of the storage potential based on all of the cells within that particular area. But all of the information about my stands resides in this layer here. So in order to get that information and join it to my stands layer, again, using some of the out-of-the-box geoprocessing tools, I can quickly do that, and I'll end up with kind of this final layer here of my recommended project locations. And if I click on a feature now in this layer, I can see not only the information about the stand, like the total acres and the landowner, but I can also see information about the carbon storage capacity, in this case, the totals, the breakdowns for all those different categories, and normalize it by the total area. So I have now a pretty accurate estimation of the total carbon storage capacity for each of my identified areas.
Scott, it looks like you've done a ton of the legwork there that I would imagine other people would be interested in seeing. How would you recommend sharing that out across your organization?
Yeah, another great question. So really, all the work we've done up to this point is going to be done by someone who's, pretty proficient in ArcGIS Pro or a desktop application where all of the analysis is being done. But other users, either in the organization or external stakeholders, are going to want to be able to access this information as well. So ArcGIS delivers the state-of-the-art kind of sharing and collaboration capabilities that allow you to take this data and publish it to a web environment where we can actually consume it. So here I've got another dashboard that's been configured specifically to show our carbon, our new kind of identified carbon project areas and the associated estimated volumes. So if I zoom in here, I can see high-level metrics like the total number of acres highlighted by these kind of bright green colors here. I see an overall storage potential estimate in tons. And then I've got each of those specific tracks that we've identified kind of broken out here. So I can actually zoom into one of these. I can see that feature highlight there on the dashboard. I can, of course, click on it and get access to all of that information that we just saw and calculated there in ArcGIS Pro. And then I can even configure a chart that shows me the breakdown for this particular tract for all of these different categories that we're storing. And I could even use that same chart there to identify tracks that have the highest potential. So I can click on one of these and sift through kind of all of the potential locations, all of the project areas, and identify those areas that are best suited and have the highest suitability and ones that we can focus on.
So once we're ready to kind of take this out to boots on the ground like we had talked about, how can field workers really leverage all of the work that you've already done when they're in the field?
Yeah, so I think the logical next step here is to take all of this data, Audrey, just like you mentioned, and do kind of a boots on the ground assessment, come up with maybe some more kind of accurate or detailed estimates based on the measurements, very similar to a typical timber cruise or forest inventory workflow that a lot of you are doing today. And with part of the ArcGIS platform, you have access to these great out-of-the-box mobile tools that enable you with this entire workflow. So here I've got a map pulled up on my tablet that I could easily take with me to the field. I can see those same layers that we just saw, both in the desktop and in the web platform, and I can actually interact with this content. So I see my blue dot there on the map that represents my current location. I can go ahead and zoom to my location. I see some of the layers, some labels on the map here. I can go ahead and click on this feature that we're in, and I can see information like the total land, or the landowner, the property, the total estimated storage capacity that we've calculated. And I could even see something like a pie chart that helps me understand the breakdown in all of those different categories that we looked at. But really what I want to be able to do is not only visualize information while I'm out in the field, but also collect data. So this Field Maps app that we're looking at also gives us the ability to collect data and get that information back to the office. So if I close out of my pop-up there and turn on one of my other layers, what I'm looking at now are all of my cruise plots. So very similar to kind of a regular forest inventory workflow. I've got kind of all of these cruise plots laid out that represent different locations where I'm going to take measurements to come up with an accurate estimation of volume. And I can see my blue dot here represents my current location. Maybe I'm going to start my work for the day. I've driven up one of our forest roads here and I've parked my truck on the side of the road. I can see all of these green dots over here actually represent my completed carbon inventory cruise plots, and all of my orange dots represent those locations that still need to be visited. Using some of the integrated capabilities of this application, I can easily click on the point there on the map where I left off yesterday. I can go ahead and select that on my map here. And what I want to be able to do is actually navigate or wayfind to that location. So a lot of you that have been out in the forest or worked out in the forest before know how kind of dense the areas can be, how difficult it can be to find your way, especially if you don't have any kind of bearings or point of references. So this app can actually help you with that. With this little nifty compass capability, I can actually use my current location and wayfind depending on the way that I'm facing here. As I rotate my tablet, we can see I've got kind of a bearing and a distance up there in the top left corner. I can actually follow this directly to the location that I need to go without getting lost. What I can optionally do as well is use location tracking that's integrated into this app. So one of the built-in layers here is to turn on my tracks. So as I'm walking through the forest, I can actually keep track of where I've been using basically a breadcrumb trail of drop points. And here I can actually configure how my track options are displayed, so I can look at information from yesterday or the last 48 hours and really understand where I've been on the map and where I still need to go based on the information that I need to collect. So for this particular workflow, right, I'm not actually out there, I can't actually collect my tracks, but I can simulate what that would look like. So here I've dropped some breadcrumbs walking to that particular point. I've taken some measurements around that point, and then I've come back to the truck. So that allows me to easily see where I've been in relation to where I need to go. And so once I get to one of those sample plot locations, really what I'm interested in doing is collecting some information. So I can go ahead and click on that plot point, and I've got some information about the plot ID, the status, and I've actually got this link in here that will allow me to collect measurement data. Now this can be done using a third-party application. If you're currently using some kind of timber cruising application, you can link out to that as well. But you can also do this work completely within ArcGIS. Here I've got a form that's been configured to capture information about this particular cruise plot. I can come in here and fill out my specs based on specific questions or types of answers that have been auto-populated. I can collect measurement information. So if I record multiple trees around that particular plot, I can easily enter in that information here. Maybe have some information auto-calculate based on how the form has been configured, and then ultimately get some overall metrics and statistics about that particular plot. And once I'm ready to go ahead and submit my data, I can go ahead and send it and then move on to my next plot or head back to the truck if it's the end of the day. So once that data gets captured, it flows back into the office and it can be used as kind of another input into this whole workflow that we're showing. And ultimately what we want to be able to do is deliver this information back into kind of this big picture dashboard where now we've had our carbon inventory added to our total kind of land asset portfolio. I can see metrics on the land value. If I wanted to add metrics on the total volume estimation or storage, I can certainly do that and track all of my assets in this one kind of interactive, easy to use application.
Awesome.
Audrey?
Thank you so much, Scott. That was really cool to see that entire workflow. So to recap, we helped our forest resource company prioritize project locations for a forest carbon project using our own data and FIA carbon inventory pilot data. Then we took that data into the field so we could better understand the condition on site. And we use this workflow for forest carbon projects, but you could use the same type of workflow for remote sensing, for forest inventories, due diligence for acquisitions, or harvest planning. But really, to be viable in today's forest industry, it's no longer sufficient to just do a harvest plan at the beginning of the year and call it good. The needs of our industry have really multiplied, and you need to be able to incorporate the latest forest conditions into your analysis. In this case, the information that Scott shared with our stakeholders is no longer accurate because a wildfire took place in the proposed project area. Unfortunately, this kind of scenario is something that we're seeing more frequently and that many of you on this call have personally been dealing with over this last year with the impact of hurricanes, wildfires, and other natural disasters. When those events happen, it's really important to be able to quickly quantify the impact of the event so you can respond appropriately. This might involve filing insurance claims, planning salvage logging operations, updating your inventories, and adjusting projections. For our forest carbon example, we need to understand the impact to the prioritized project location. To do this workflow, we're going to use updated imagery to assess the current condition of the proposed project locations. There's more and more imagery that's being made available in our Living Atlas every day. And if you haven't used our Living Atlas before, I really encourage you to pull it up as soon as this webinar is over and take a look at all the imagery that you can bring into your own organization's data. For our workflow today, we're using premium high resolution imagery that's updated daily or weekly to ensure that we're doing an analysis on the most up-to-date conditions on site. This imagery comes from our partner Planet, who has a forestry specific offering, and we're happy to discuss that. Reach out to me if you're interested in more information. I'm going to turn it back over to Scott, who's going to walk through that change detection workflow.
All right, thanks again, Audrey. So here I've got Pro pulled back up. I'm putting my analyst cap back on, and I really want to see how our prioritized project locations have been impacted by a nearby wildfire. And the first thing I really want to do is visualize where this fire boundary is. I don't necessarily have that data, but I know that that information has been kept up to date and been made accessible through the Living Atlas. And I can easily connect to that content directly here in Pro. I've already got my Living Atlas option selected here, and I see here it's been a very popular layer this year, so it shows up right near the top. I can go ahead and drag in my USA current wildfires layer, and with that, add that data on my map. So I can see the Claremont fire here in Northern California. It's been really devastating this year, and it's actually affecting more than just my assets. It's affecting the community around it, but I do see a lot of my identified project locations down here in the South region have been impacted by this fire. And it's really hard to quantify the impact of this fire just by looking at this boundary. So I know that imagery is also a great source of collecting data, especially through its remote sensing capabilities and being able to do things like change detection and visualize the current state. So also part of the Living Atlas is a bunch of great free imagery content that you can access and pull into Pro as well. So if I come back in the Living Atlas, search for imagery, I get a lot of different things returned depending on where you're at, right? We have the imagery base map. We've got things like the USA NAEP program imagery, and all of those are good, but usually the revisit rate isn't as high as you might want for a case like this where we're looking or really interested in looking at current imagery. Part of the Living Atlas does include the Sentinel-2 views, which actually do offer pretty high resolution and pretty high revisit rate. And we can actually see what that looks like. I've already got that layer loaded into my map here. And for our fire impacted area, once we turn on that layer, we can actually see a lot of the burn scars in this particular region. And we can see some of the healthier vegetation down here. It still looks green, but a lot of this area is very much burnt or browned. Again, it's really still kind of difficult to quantify the impact, just looking at the visible imagery here. And the Sentinel-2, we talked a little bit about bands earlier. The Sentinel-2 views are really great for this kind of natural color imagery, but it only has these three bands, these red, green, and blue bands. And that really only allows us to see the imagery in this visible color. In order to do things like change detection, having that fourth band, that infrared band, is really important and helps us visualize things that we can't see with just our naked eye. So Audrey mentioned Planet Imagery. We've actually got a plugin directly in Pro here that allows us to not only search for imagery, but load it directly into our map here. So the first thing I'm going to do is generate an AOI here on my map. I'm interested in this area where we've got some high potential locations. And when I draw that bounding box, I can come in here and apply all sorts of different filters based on a date range, cloud cover, area cover. And I can actually go ahead and search for imagery directly in this area. And when I do that, I'm going to get several different things that have been returned. And I can see here that the latest imagery for this particular region is November 16th. So that's like 2 or 3 days ago, right? And if we go and toggle on our Sentinel-2 views, we can see this imagery is pretty up to date. In this case, we've got imagery from the 10th, so about 10 days ago. But here within Planet, we've got imagery from just a few days ago. And I can go ahead and turn that on and see exactly what that imagery looks like in its raw format. And I may look at different dates depending on cloud cover and different things that I'm interested in. But I can go ahead and stream that imagery in directly into my map with very little effort. So what I'd really like to do for this workflow, since I want to compare how this area has changed between 2 dates, is I want to go ahead and get imagery from as recent as possible. And then I want to go ahead and get imagery from before the fire began. So once I go ahead and search for those 2 dates, I can download that imagery, I can order it directly from Pro, and then I can use it for analysis. So over here in my contents pane, I've already got those images downloaded. In this case, I've got a pre-fire image that was collected back in August, where we can see a lot of the vegetation exists. We can see our stand boundaries, which locations have already been harvested. I've also got our post-fire image as well. And again, looking at just the raw imagery, we can start to detect and kind of visualize the areas that have been impacted, but it's hard to quantify. So I mentioned the bands a few minutes ago. If we look at our band properties here, we do see we have that fourth band, that infrared band. What that infrared band is going to allow us to do is actually apply different raster functions. In Pro, you have access to all of these different raster functions to actually change how that data looks. So we've got this NDVI raster function that allows you to easily visualize vegetation health based on the differences between some of the bands in the imagery. And by simply applying that raster function to these 2 images, we can easily see or start to see the change between those 2 images. So here's my pre-fire NDVI. All these dark green colors represent really healthy vegetation. And then here's my post-fire NDVI. So all of these brighter green colors represent vegetation that isn't so healthy, right, or barren areas. So really what we're interested in doing now is computing a change between these two NDVI instances. And again, looking at my raster functions, this can be done pretty simply. Using this compute change function, I'll just go ahead and select my pre-fire NDVI, my post-fire NDVI, and we're going to calculate a difference. And on the fly, this is just going to process those two images. It's going to create an output layer. And then this output layer is going to allow me to easily visualize the change between those two images. I'm just going to go ahead and update the color ramp here. We want those purple areas to represent those areas that have seen a lot of change. So I'm just going to invert this here. And now we see, in this particular case, all of our areas in dark purple represent those areas with a great or significant change or a decrease in vegetation health, and all of our areas in green represent an increase, maybe due to the seasonality or the time of the year. And then a bunch of these white or lighter areas represent, little or no change. So if I go ahead and drag this underneath my project locations and then throw those on top there, I can now easily see and start to quantify which particular stands have been impacted. I can go ahead and click on this one tract here. I can see this particular tract had 528, an estimate of 528 tons of CO2 storage potential. But obviously that has changed now that a significant portion of this particular tract has burned. So I might run through that same process that we just worked through a few minutes ago, maybe masking out that area, going back and calculating the difference from all of the pixels and generating kind of a more accurate, up-to-date estimate based on the change that's occurred there because of the fire.
So Scott, this is all done in ArcPro, it looks like, and how would you get this information out to some of your operational folks so that they could start to act on it?
Yeah, great question. Again, this is really the workflow of an analyst or someone who's proficient with the desktop application here. But this information could easily be shared with the rest of the organization or any of those kind of key stakeholders simply by sharing this layer or creating something like a web app that allows a user to easily come in here and maybe tag all of the different stands or tracks that have been impacted. So there's a lot of different ways you could leverage the platform to not only share out the content, but make it interactive and engage people in a way that they can actually contribute information back into the system as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much for showing that. So I want to recap with all of you what Scott just walked through here. And he used recently updated imagery to quickly quantify potential carbon project locations that were impacted by this wildfire. He described how we could share the results with stakeholders so that they could really understand the scope of the impact and act on that information. And this type of workflow could be applied to many other use cases, quantifying impacts from other natural disasters, or even quantifying the impact of a predicted event like a timber harvest. We really hope that you took some valuable things from this webinar today, with one of the biggest takeaways that all of you in the forest industry already have the tools and the knowledge to use ArcGIS to access new markets like the forest carbon markets. It's just about building a new workflow. If you haven't explored publicly available data before, I hope we convince you to really look at these data sets and think critically about how they can help you scale your work. And I hope we inspired you to think about new ways of sharing the great work that you do in an interactive format so that your stakeholders can pull that up in a web browser or even in the field to better understand your resources. And if you're ready to get started using some of these workflows, there's a few different ways that we can help you. So we can start out with a licensing assessment to look at the licensing that you have, the workflows that you're hoping to do, and identify potential licensing that you would need to make that happen. And then we have what are called our typical channels. And that's where you would really learn a lot of these tools and workflows yourselves to implement these. And that really starts with training. So we have instructor-led training classes online. We also have self-paced e-learning that's included with your maintenance. We're going to be sharing out this webinar recording so you can review it later on or share it with other colleagues of yours. And then we can quickly help you get up and running with our professional services team through jumpstart packages. And those are 3 or 5 day jumpstarts to get your ArcGIS Online organization configured, get field workflows configured and things like that. And then you can start to leverage some of the imagery out there, including premium imagery, which we can provide through our partnership with Planet. If you are ready to really get started with this at an organizational level and scale these workflows, we can work with you through our accelerated channels. And that would include us coming on site or virtually right now to do a rapid assessment workshop with your team to really understand your business, understand your needs, understand where you're trying to go, and then work with you strategically to build a pathway to get there and a roadmap for implementation. And that would be really for organizations that have a budget associated with this type of implementation. So with that, we're going to move on to the question and answer portion of the webinar. And we really want to hear from you. So please type your questions into the GoToWebinar question box. And it looks like we have some excellent questions coming in. I'm going to start with one here. Scott, how would you incorporate some of your own imagery or LiDAR data that you already have into these workflows?
Yeah, good question. So today we showed sourcing imagery from a couple different locations. One was a living atlas. The other was third-party partner imagery from Planet. But if you have your own imagery that you've collected, maybe you've flown it from drones or even aerial imagery, or you've gone ahead and purchased some from a third party, you can certainly integrate that into this workflow as well. So we showed a lot of kind of vector data management, but ArcGIS has a lot of raster management and analysis capabilities as well. So you can bring in that imagery that you have, any LiDAR data. Of course, that's another way that you could collect inventory data. So we went more of the kind of imagery route today, but you could go out and capture LiDAR. We have ways that you can manage and analyze point cloud data, serve that up in something like a web application so that the rest of your users could potentially view that and interact with that as well. So really the sky's the limit. There's a lot of different options, and you can certainly incorporate any existing data that you already have.
Awesome, thank you. Another question that we have is, can you do this type of workflow for other inventories? Today we showed a forest carbon inventory, but what if you're doing a species inventory or land cover analysis or something like that? How could these same workflows apply to those instances?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the concepts are the same, regardless if it's a carbon inventory or species inventory or just a regular forest inventory. It usually involves some element of planning, some element of data collection out in the field, some element of analysis and visualization back in the office. So as we kind of reviewed today, we have capabilities that can augment kind of the workflows in all of those different phases. And you can certainly bring in third-party applications. I know a lot of our customers use third-party applications for timber cruising and kind of growth modeling and things like that. ArcGIS is kind of an open platform, so we can certainly work with other systems, but there's a lot of great out-of-the-box capabilities, specifically in the field mobility department around visualization, like we saw today, location tracking, some data collection, even navigation. So if you're interested in any of that, feel free to give us a call or set up a conversation with us, and we'd be happy to walk you through some of the possibilities there.
Fantastic. Along those same lines, if you're working with contractors to do some of that cruising, how would you be able to share this information securely outside of your organization?
Yeah, another good question. So we have different models, different licensing models that we can discuss with you if that's something you're interested in, different ways that you can engage and collaborate with stakeholders. But this idea of sharing collaboration is very much a core capability of ArcGIS. So whether it's through field mobility applications or easily configured web applications. There's definitely a benefit to adding kind of this digital component to your workflows, being able to share content more interactively through something like a web application instead of sending hard files back and forth. So yeah, happy to talk about that if interested, but the capability is there for sure.
Awesome, thank you, Scott. Another question is does this workflow work in desktop or is this only in Pro?
Yeah, so a lot of the core analysis tools that we use today are definitely available in ArcMap or ArcGIS Desktop. Some of the kind of image analyst specific tools are only available in Pro through the image analyst extension. I don't know if we used a whole lot of those today, but a lot of the raster functions and geoprocessing tools are definitely available in ArcMap. I'd say Pro, obviously looking at today, right, it's a much more different application, but it's also streamlined for these workflows, especially with sharing content to the web and consuming that content to the web. So creating those dashboards, sharing data, enabling those field workers with that content is really made easy, with Pro being able to publish and share layers, and then bringing in content from the Living Atlas, like those fire boundaries or that imagery. Again, still possible in ArcMap. You can connect to ArcGIS Online and bring in data, but the user experience is much more seamless using Pro.
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that is we have an excellent 2-day training course on migrating from ArcMap to ArcPro. So if this is kind of the push that you need to start making that transition, then we really highly recommend that course to get you more comfortable using Pro. Another question that we have here is about making dashboards. And Lauren wrote that the dashboard makes it really easy to see and share this information. What is the best way to learn how to create a similar dashboard for our organization?
Yeah, so dashboards are just an app, an integrated app available through ArcGIS Online or Enterprise. The configuration of dashboards is pretty simple. There are a few kind of details and tweaks and kind of tricks of the trade that you might want to learn. There's a couple different ways to kind of get up to speed on that. So there's a lot of great resources available through the Esri training website. A lot of those are free. Some exercises, some tutorials, some videos that will help you get familiar with what a dashboard is, how you can build one, what some of the underlying concepts are. And then, of course, you can come to us. Happy to have a conversation, kind of share with you some of the configurations we've created and how they were created if you're interested in doing something very similar.
We have some pre-configured dashboard templates for forestry specifically that you can kind of get started playing around with and getting more comfortable using dashboards, and those are available on our website. Scott, another question is that you showed this from the perspective of a company that's evaluating their own assets, and how could you use some of these workflows to evaluate assets that you don't own but might be interested in purchasing?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the data. Again, the folks there at FIA and the Forest Service have done a great job kind of aggregating a lot of this content. They're going to make it available, and it's going to be a really kind of exciting and great source of information. You could certainly use that to do kind of what we just did today, right? But instead of identifying areas that we already own, maybe you just want to identify all kind of high potential areas in a given state or in a given county or region. So the workflow from that perspective would be very much the same. But if you've got other kind of input data sets, other sources of the inventory information, certainly bring that in, evaluate it, right, generate an output, and then even use something like a dashboard or a web app to engage with potential investors or potential stakeholders, create more of an interactive experience for them to view. It really just depends kind of what your perspective is, what you're trying to do, but I think the tools, everything we showed today would be directly applicable to that workflow as well.
Awesome. Joel was interested in getting more information on the app that you were showing to navigate around the field plots. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that particular app that we showed is our new Field Maps application. It just got released a couple weeks ago. It's available on both Android and iOS devices. And that's really kind of the next generation of our field mobility tools. So traditionally, we've had kind of a focused app approach where we've created multiple apps for things specifically like navigation or data collection or visualization. What this Field Maps app does is it brings all of those capabilities into one easy to use kind of single streamlined application. So you can still leverage all of your existing content. If you've got an existing web map created, you could easily bring that into Field Maps. You can configure it for offline use. You can add links to do data collection, and then coming in the near future with the additional releases, we'll have the ability to do things like workforce management and tasking, and even integrated navigation. So it's going to be a really exciting time for our kind of field mobility tools as we enter into this next phase. But that app in particular is kind of where we're placing all of our focus and all of our future development in. So it's going to be a really great tool moving forward.
Awesome. And if you're interested in getting started with field maps, again, reach out to us. We can help you get to know that app and understand how some of your field workflows might, work really well and help you with those.
Yep.
So we have another question here. Oh,
sorry,
go
I'll
ahead.
do one more point on that. So if you have an existing ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise license today, you can use field maps. It doesn't require any additional licensing. Even if you're only a viewer, you can still use it to visualize maps, toggle on and off layers, create markups. It's got all of the same capabilities that our Explorer app had, but it's also got the integrated data collection and location tracking capabilities as well. So it's something that you could start leveraging today.
Excellent. We have another field mobility related question here. As you know, we have some limitations in access to GPS with good accuracy, and in forest areas, the GPS is affected by tree crowns. So how can we solve or reduce this issue?
Yeah, so this is a problem that a lot of our users have. Obviously, field maps and some of our other mobile apps do support high accuracy GPS receivers. So if the data accuracy is an issue, that could potentially help solve the problem. It's probably not going to solve it completely, but it can help solve the problem, especially when collecting or editing features and you need that precise location. But if you're doing location tracking, you don't really necessarily have to be connected in order to do that. So the app does use the integrated receiver of the device, and that could be augmented with that high accuracy receiver. But you can collect tracks like we showed, even if you're offline, and you can use those and store those on your device, so that even if you don't have an internet, or even if you're not connected to the internet, you'd be able to see where you've been. You'd be able to track, where you're at in relation to what you need to do, and have all of that information kind of on top of your operational map of all of your layers and all of your reference content that you're looking at.
Awesome. Here's a great question from Corey. Do you see applications becoming a larger part in remote sensing for forest inventory by automating the data manipulation?
Yeah, so I think this idea of remote sensing and imagery, not only for visualization, but also analysis, is definitely becoming more of a hot topic. So the workflow we showed today was just one specific use of imagery. We have a lot of great tools. A lot of work is being done in the artificial intelligence, machine learning realm, using imagery to do things like feature detection, feature extraction. So that could be another use case, especially in a change detection workflow, where you're actually using AI and ML to do that instead of just some of the built-in tools. So there's really a lot of different capabilities, and there's a lot of great imagery content and imagery partners out there that you can source data from. So it really just depends kind of what your workflows are, but the tools and the workflows and the content is there, and it's getting better as we move forward.
Thanks, Scott. Another question is about how to incorporate the network distance to mills tool in this workflow.
Yes, good question. So there is a variety of network analysis tools that you can leverage in ArcGIS Pro. Things like generating service times, calculating distances, optimizing routes. So the application that we showed was more of a origin destination kind of matrix. So coming up with either a drive time or a distance, and then that would be one factor into the overall cost of delivery or cost of transportation, right? There's other things like fuel cost or driver rates or any type of other, even things like road fees or tolls, right, that you might take into consideration. But all of that can be modeled in some of these tools to generate things like origin destination, kind of driver distance matrices, optimized routes, and then of course that information can be shared out to the workers in the field if they need to do things like navigation or routing, and we have tools to kind of support that end-to-end workflow as well.
Fantastic. One other question here, and I know that you've already talked about this quite a bit. A lot of our customers are using Collector in the field, and Davis is curious about how Field Maps is different from Collector, what those differences are.
Yeah, good question. So Field Map has pretty much exact parity with Collector. If you actually open it up, it looks exactly like Collector does today. Really the only difference is that it's got the other capabilities added into it as well. So you'll see the markup capability from Explorer, you'll see the location tracks capability from Tracker, and as Field Maps gets built out, you'll also see some of the workforce and navigator capabilities come in as well. So from a user perspective, it should be a very simple transition from Collector to Field Maps. Their interface is almost identical. Really the only thing on the back end is that Field Maps has a new web application where you can actually configure things like smart forms into the map itself, conditional visibility, some logic when you're actually entering data. And you can also configure things like offline areas and things like that. But from a user perspective, Field Maps should be a very easy and seamless transition.
Thank you so much, Scott, and thanks for fielding all of those questions. You guys have so many wonderful questions. We wish we could get to all of them. If we didn't get to your question today, we will follow up with you directly after the webinar. And at this time, we are going to kind of close things up. I wanted to provide our contact information here if you'd like to get a hold of us and talk with us further about these workflows. And we also have contact information for Ty Wilson and Chris Oswald at the U.S. Forest Service if you have questions about the FIA program. If you haven't joined our LinkedIn group before, then please join there. And we really, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you so much for being a part of this webinar. Have a great rest of your day.
Yep, thank you. Take care.
Thank you.